So first of all, I think I've been told that most of the crowd here are those who have cleared this prelims. So congratulations for clearing the most horrible prelims in the history of UPSC. I'm sure that if I had written this prelims, I would not have cleared it. Now coming to our topic of discussion for the day, GS3 economics. The first thing that I have to say is that economics is usually a very polarizing subject. I've seen people either say that they love economics or they're absolutely scared of it. So one of the reasons, as you know, is because we don't have a Lakshmikant for economics, right? There's no one single source from which we can say that we've done this and we are done with the syllabus. And it's also very dynamic. It's current affairs driven. But I feel that if you go through the presentation that we have today, I have a feeling that we'll understand that fortunately, economics is one of the areas where UPSC very religiously sticks to the syllabus. So I think today's session, what I'll try to do is I'll try to anchor most of the session by going back to the syllabus and make sure that we are not veering off track, because it's one of the subjects where we feel that when we read the newspaper, we feel almost everything is economics, right? So, and if we go by that methodology, we'll be easily lost. So we'll have to figure out some strategy to draw some contours around what can we really call economics, how can we make use of previous year questions to make sure that we have some solid content for each subtopic within economic development, right? So broadly, today's session, what we're going to do is, as you know, answer writing has two main building blocks. One is content and the other is presentation. And we cannot really focus on presentation unless we have some content. Right now, if most of you are starting out with answer writing, I'm sure that not all of you will be very well versed with the entire syllabus, or you might want to do some more value addition. And that's how I was also. Though I'm a postgraduate in economics, I mean, the demand of GST and the optional economics, which was my optional too, are very different. So when we start out, all of us write bad answers. That's okay. But over time, when we start building content, we will get better. So the way we'll do content building is first we'll understand the syllabus and how we can tie back our note making strategy to the syllabus. And then we'll discuss some value addition strategies specifically for economics. And after that, we'll try to take a short break if necessary. And you can keep asking questions in between if need be. And after that, we'll move on to presentation, where I think there's no one-stop solution to writing any kind of answers, but we'll discuss some basic frameworks which can help us formulate our thoughts during answer writing. I'll show you some of my copies, which I had, the answers that I had written during my mains test series. And then we'll discuss a couple of questions, which are previous year questions for the sake of practice. So far, so good. Everybody with me?
Yes, yes.
Great, great. Okay. So first we'll move on to content building. So actually, a lot of us have heard toppers say things like, you should memorize the syllabus, right? But when we look at the syllabus, it's so huge, it's very difficult to memorize the whole thing. But what we can do is look at these highlighted words, for instance. This is the entirety of the economic development syllabus that is part of GSC. So there are exactly 10 different buckets that UPSC has told us that we have to focus on. And amongst these buckets, you should focus on these keywords: planning, growth, development, employment. And the next time you go and read the newspaper, or if you're reading some value addition content, go back and remember these keywords. Because you'll see in the subsequent slides that all of the UPSC previous year questions come from these keywords only. They like I said before, they stick very much to exactly these keywords that are mentioned in the syllabus. We'll see how. As to where to build content for this from, firstly, I think, like I said, there's no Lakshmikant for economics. I think there is a need for some basic material. So, for instance, if you're from iLearn would have given you some basic set of notes or handouts, and that is necessary, I feel, because there's a lot of static portion in economics, which has to come from somewhere. For example, let's say liberalization. So we need to know what was the timeline, what were the policies that were involved, what are the specific acts, what were its ramifications. We need some content which directs us towards this. Um, so that is necessary. Even investment models, for example, we need to know what are the different investment models, what are the names, what are the specific features of them. Only then can we move forward and make sure that our value addition content makes sense, right? So either go with what the market tells us to do, which is Ramesh Singh, which I think is a little bulky. It's not all the content that is there is not really necessary from a GS3 standpoint, but again, you can come back to these keywords and figure out what are really important from Ramesh Singh. Or if you have your class notes, you can start with them. After that, value addition completely comes from current affairs, which is basically your editorials and all these economic dailies. I don't suggest reading economic dailies for GS3. You can watch these economic news survey summary videos that come on YouTube if you can. If you are somebody really underconfident with this portion of the syllabus. But more than that, I feel is unnecessary for GS3, right? And of course, there are some standard government sources like Niti Aayog at 75, which is a great report. I'll show you subsequently how to draw content from these areas. And of course, the budget and economic survey. So these are the main sources when I say that we have to collect content, right? And of course, beyond all this, there's always Google. And I myself have drawn most of my content from Google searches, my value addition content, right? So coming back to this, these are the keywords that I had mentioned, and hopefully you've had a chance to glance through these at least, right? Now let's look at these questions that came in 2020, right? If you have observed, every year about 110 to 120 marks comes from economy, which is a great deal. It's almost half the mark distribution for GSC, right? So it's a huge mark fetcher if we actually prepare well for it. But so what I've said before is we've looked at these keywords. For each of these questions, try and figure out which bucket these questions fit into, right? So I've already done this for 2020 questions. Try doing this for 2019 onwards, at least till the past 5 years. In this presentation, I have all the questions to 2016. So take it up as an exercise and figure out which buckets these questions fall into, right? And the reason for doing that is if you really go through these questions and figure out, you'll actually understand that some questions are verbatim, word to word as to what the syllabus has asked you to study, right? For example, there's this first question of intergenerational equity and inclusive growth, sustainable growth. All that is directly falling into our category 2, right? Where we have inclusive growth as a keyword. So similarly, for all the subsequent questions, when you get a chance, do this, please do this exercise, because it is one way to understand that the syllabus is actually a constraint. UPSC does not ask everything under the sun, right? So this is the first step that we should be doing when we talk about content building. Now, going forward, we're talking about how to add more content, as in you would have heard that, there's this practice of people collecting introductions, keywords, flowcharts. Flowcharts are typically called a part of presentation, but I'm calling it a part of content because sometimes it's very difficult to come up with flowcharts when you're writing the answers. So it's really good if you can create a repository of such material beforehand, right? So what I've done is, so we have these 10 buckets that we have talked before. So for the sake of today's discussion, I've just created an illustration for point number 2, which is inclusive growth and issues arising from it, right? So what I'll try to do is how to go about creating content for a topic like inclusive growth. So everybody with me so far? Am I going too fast? Someone? Anyone?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. So, so like I said before, the first step is looking at your previous year questions. All these are questions that have been asked from the area of inclusive growth. And you can see that UPSC is fairly regular when it comes to asking questions from these areas like inclusive growth. And they're very similar questions. They are, if you have content for one of these questions, you'll more or less be able to answer all of these, right? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to actually go through these questions. Just read them. Okay, so I hope that you've at least glanced through these questions once. And the next step, once you've looked at previous year questions, is to figure out what are the areas that UPSC is generally asking questions from. Within inclusive growth, what aspects are being asked in the questions, right? So the key takeaways that we have once we look at these four questions, which are from the past 5 years, is that firstly, we should know what is the definition of inclusive growth, preferably a standard definition if you can find it. Then, of course, these three basically sustainability, growth, demographic dividend, all these come in tangent with inclusive growth. Wherever there is a question on IG, there will be some element of these, as you can see in question one, right? And sustainability, you can see in question and a couple of other questions also. So make sure that when you are preparing content for IG, you are keeping in mind the other aspects of how it relates to these two elements, right? Then what are the features of inclusive growth? When we talk about inclusive growth, who are the people the stakeholders that we say are parties when we say we have to achieve inclusive growth? What has been India's experience? Has India's IG strategy been a success or failure? What are the schemes that the government is envisaging to promote inclusive growth? What are the challenges? Any innovative ideas that you have for betterment? And of course, if there are any success or failure stories that we can find from the Indian context, that's also value addition material. For example, our Kudumbashree model in Kerala, we can say that it's one of the models which actually is a success story at grassroots levels, right? So it's something that connects the local populace to the high level policies and make sure that every member of the society is integrated into the value chain, right? So that's a success story, for example. So similarly, you can collect more case studies, and all these will come from editorials, news articles, and actually even Kana. iLearn's Kana platform is a great source for finding case studies like these. And so yeah, so basically this topic, these are the key takeaways that you can see if you analyze these questions, right? Now, the next step is we have 2 or 3 tasks ahead of us. So all that is going forward, what we're going to discuss about is what I'd like to call embellishments. So there's some basic content, like I said, that we need, which comes from your notes or books like Ramesh Singh, and ideas from your budget, economic survey, whatever summaries of these that you have read, right? After this, whatever we are going to do, which is collecting keywords, creating some stylized introductions and conclusions, flowcharts, these are all embellishments to your answer, which will make your answer stand out. So that is one way of fetching more marks, right? And that's how we can make sure that there's some uniqueness to your answers. So firstly, since we are talking about inclusive growth as a case in point, even when you look for keywords in your mind, try to segregate those keywords into these aspects. I mean, when we talked about takeaways, we talked about challenges, we talked about ideas way forward, we talked about what were the schemes that the government is coming up with, right? So whenever you see, all these are, by the way, terms that have come from newspapers, right? So whenever you see these terms, just copy paste them in one place, create a repository for these, and maybe make a marking, say that these are terms which I can use when this inclusive growth bucket is where the question falls into, right? So here, for instance, when we talk about what are the challenges for inclusive growth, we can see that reactive rule making is not something that the government should do. There should be proactive rule making, right? One problem with inclusive growth is there might be a dependency syndrome when we are doling out a lot of benefits. People don't have incentive to actually do any value addition. There's no permanent asset creation, right? So that causes some sort of moral hazard and a dependency syndrome. So that's a keyword that you can use. Then when it comes to targeting, there are inclusion and exclusion errors. Some of these are common terms, but still, if you mention them and underline them in your answer, that will make sure that the examiner notices it, and he or she would understand that you've taken the pain to actually delve into the nuances of the topic, right? And similarly, for way forward, you can think of keywords like these, from agriculturists, create agripreneurs, who are people who are more inclined towards investing productive assets for creating value, right? So that's one way of ensuring that there is empowerment. So these are all nice words that you can include in your answers for inclusive growth. And I think specifically for inclusive growth, schemes are not a very difficult thing to find, because every scheme will have some element of inclusivity in it, right? So you can list down these schemes. Of course, I know all of you are familiar with these from your prelims experience. So, but still having them in one place is a good way to ensure that when you need them, you will remember them in time, right? So this is also something that's a good practice. So this is it when it comes to keywords. I'll actually show you a document where I've done this for the entire GS3 paper, but it's not very organized. That's why I cannot share it physically right now, but I can show you how I went about doing this for other topics other than inclusive growth, right? So now moving forward, we talked about keywords. The next task we had was some stylized introductions and conclusions that we can write. So one advantage is that uh, so usually introductions and conclusions, most often what people do is they write definitions, right? If the directive is more of a what, where, how kind of question, or if it's an opinion based question, people write facts like quote some index, or some committee report, right? But the problem with that is, if you don't have these figures prepared handy beforehand, it's very difficult to remember them during the time of the exam. So I've already done that for a lot of topics. Like I said before, I'll share the document when it's in the right shape and form to be comprehensible. But for the time being, let's focus on the introductions and conclusions I had prepared for inclusive growth, right? So, like I said, if it's a what, where kind of directive, you can always start with a definition. And there are standard definitions. For example, there's a UNDP definition. As you can see, there's an OECD definition, there's a World Bank definition. So, and some of these are not very hard to, you don't have to by heart them, but if you understand the essence of the definition and say that World Bank is the one which gave this definition, it gives some authenticity to the answer that you're writing, right? So this is actually a good material to collect. Then, of course, there are lots of indices and reports that regularly come, and you can see them in all current affairs summary magazines. So instead of reading the whole magazine, I would say that if you can find such kind of stylized facts, you can copy paste them in one place. For example, these are some of the facts that are relevant for questions in inclusive growth. There's an Oxfam report about wealth inequality, which a lot of you would have seen. Social mobility is again an element of inclusive growth. So you can quote the GSMI, right? And India's rank in inclusive growth index is also a good figure. And apart from that, sometimes what happens is in a lot of these subtopics, there are some standard processes or some approaches which already exist. So if you know about them, that's also a good substantiation to what you're writing in your copies, right? For example, for inclusive growth specifically, there are these 3 or 4 different approaches that are usually talked about. There's a trickle down approach, which by far is deemed to be not much of a success in India. And there's a welfare approach, which is scheme driven completely. There's a bottom up approach, and there's a public relations approach, which is basically grassroots empowerment, making local governments reach out to the last mile and empower the arm admi. So these are some standard approaches that exist for inclusive growth. So I mean, these kind of yes, so these kind of processes are also something that you can collect as value addition material, right? So far so good. Everybody with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So last but not the least, we'll move to flowcharts. So when it comes to flowcharts, there are you might be familiar with the standard flowcharts that everybody uses, right? There's a hub and spoke model, then there's a Venn diagram, then there's the timeline, there's the circular process, right? These are all some regular flowcharts that you can see in most topper copies. But one thing is, make sure that you're not drawing a flowchart for the sake of putting it there. It should connect to the question, it should have some relevance, and it should not occupy a lot of real estate. So if you have a 2-page question, half of a page should not be one flowchart, right? Unless it is something where you're putting in a lot of content. For example, this is basically a flowchart. It's not exactly a flowchart. It's actually a clipping that I found in one of the government reports. I'm not sure which one it is. It could be Niti Aayog at 75, if I'm not mistaken. So here, from here, actually, you can derive some flowcharts. Here they've talked about dimensions of IG, right? So you can maybe put a partition diagram and talk about various angles like these, put a couple of points beneath each, or again you can draw a Venn diagram and again draw a couple of points, write a couple of points for each circle, something like that. So much content is actually wasteful if you put in one flowchart. So if you're drawing a flowchart, make sure that you're not investing a lot of time to actually beautify it by writing more and more points. If you're writing points, you might as well write it in the main body of the answer, right? But at the same time, such kind of clippings that you can find in government reports and newspaper articles are some things that you can snip and paste in your value addition copy, so that going forward you can draw value addition and you can create flowcharts from this content, right? So that is one way of going about and creating this repository for flowcharts. So when I'm sharing my answers, I'll actually show you how I've made use of some of these diagrams as well. But for the sake of inclusive growth, I think this is one such clipping where it's all aspects of flowcharts are covered. You can derive any kind of flowchart from this content, right? So to summarize what we've talked about, so the first step to creating content is bucketing your previous year questions, understanding what kind of questions exactly come from each subtopic. And after that, going forward, whatever you do, whatever value addition you do, whenever you read a newspaper, always go back to those keywords that we had highlighted and make sure that in your mind, you're always segregating content that way. Otherwise, you will easily get lost in the process of finding more and more content, especially in a subject like economics. So yeah, like I said, segregate current affairs and value addition material by the syllabus keywords. That is the second step. And then comes our embellishments, which is basically collecting thematic keywords, introductions and conclusions, which you can do for every subtopic, every one of those 10 list bucket that we had created. And last but not the least, you can create a repository of flowcharts and some data. So again, it should not be that we're collecting so much data that there's no way we'll remember what we've written down, right? So for each topic, maximum of 5 or 6 data points, which you're sure you will remember. Oh, and make sure that you use it in your answer writing sessions, right? So if you write and reproduce these facts again and again, there's a better chance that you'll retain them when you sit for the actual exam. So only create a repository of enough data points that you can remember. Don't go overboard and create too many data points. So for example, I've seen a lot of people when it comes to when the time comes when the budget and economic survey comes out, there are all these very minute statistical models that are given, and they have a lot of data that is attached to it, right? There's significance, there's some correlation figures, etc., etc. I've seen actually a lot of people try and memorize such minute details. I would say such level of scrutiny and such kind of ambition is unnecessary in GS3. Actually, even for optional is unnecessary. So be a little judicious when you're finding data that you can reproduce for the answers that you write. So far, so good. Is everybody with me?
Yes, ma'am.
So like I said before, what I'll do is I'll show you the content that I had created for GS3. Can you see my screen? Can you
Yes,
see the
ma'am.
Word document?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So actually, I really wanted to share this Word document with you, but as you can see, this is something that is not at all organized. So what happened was, by the time I figured out what to do exactly as my strategy, it was very close to the mains. And as a result, I had not done the step 2 that I had mentioned, that we should be segregating our content by, those 10 buckets that we mentioned, right? So I'll try to organize this a little, and I'll definitely share this over a public forum. But what I wanted to show you is how I had created data points like these. So some of these are actually reports, indices, and some of these are statistical figures that global bodies have given. And a lot of these are directly from news articles or editorials that have come in the Hindu, right? So uh, when you're making notes for your after your daily newspaper analysis, I would suggest that instead of summarizing a news article, collect such stylized fact and paste it in one single place like this, so that you can use it at a later point of time. So I think this part of it is whatever I've collected from current affairs. Um, I'll also show you the introductions and conclusions that I had created. And by the way, Niti Aayog's India at 75 report is a really amazing place where you can find a lot of innovative suggestions for every aspect of whatever is mentioned in the syllabus. I've already summarized it as I deemed fit, as in I focus more on the areas which and solutions that I was not familiar with. So you can use them for your purpose. But if you find that you can add more value to that, please go ahead and read the report. Don't read it word to word, but like I said, focus on the keywords and figure out that what aspect is something that you're unfamiliar with. And so any content that you create, for me, I had two criteria to make sure to decide whether or not I want to remember something. A, it should have been something that I would not be able to reproduce myself. It could be an idea, it could be a case study, or it could be something that I could not have found anywhere else apart from this source, right? So I can say for a fact that Niti Aayog's report has a lot of solutions that we won't usually find anywhere else. The second criteria is, like I said before, if there something very factual, right? If there are some figures, some committee recommendations, which are very important. For example, Ashok Dalwai committee's specific recommendations as to how can you double farmers' income. So if you have specific pointers, which are committee recommendations, that's also something that I wrote down. So two things: either an idea that I cannot reproduce myself, or a fact that I would not remember unless I had written it down. These are the only two criteria I used when it came to note making. Otherwise, I did not make any regular newspaper notes uh, for GS3, right? So coming back to what we were discussing. So these are all actually facts that I've divided according to topics that come from Niti Aayog's at 75 report. So these, like you can see, these are all solutions that the report has provided. Open up dredging market, expedite, Sagarmala, etc., etc. So there's a bunch of content here that you can definitely exploit for your answer writing. And this is for the entire GS paper. It's not just for economics. So coming to economy, for example, LFPR reports, average unemployment rate, all these are actually stylized facts that you can use in answers in related to economy. And again, like I said before, a lot of this content is directly copy pasted from editorials. Some of it is from sources like Niti Aayog's report, and a lot of it is also from the budget and economic survey, right? So, and as you can see, it's not a lot. It's hardly one page. More than this is actually impossible for anybody to retain till the time of the exam, right? And there are some definitions. So I had already shown you the standard definitions I had collected for inclusive growth. Similarly, there are a bunch of definitions that these global organizations give you, right? Credit Suisse is given this definition. Insolvency, there's a specific definition for insolvency when it comes to NPA questions, right? So you can collect such definitions, which you can use at a later point in time. These are specific Niti at 75 pointers, and I've again segregated them by topics, subtopics, and there are examples. Then there are keywords, like I had mentioned. I had copy pasted only inclusive growth related keywords, but these are all a list of uh, a bucket list of all keywords that you can use for the entire GS3 paper. So I did not segregate it by economics, technology, and security. So anyhow, however you do it, make sure that all this is in one place. And at the same time, what I have to say when it comes to value addition is, at this point of time, which is between prelims and mains, don't invest a lot of time doing this exercise. So whatever I've shown you might look like a lot, but actually the amount of time that I spend doing it is very little. I hardly spend maybe one, maximum 2 hours per day doing this exercise, because it's a very interesting exercise and it's very easy for you to actually go beyond the demand of what is required, right? And as a result of that, you will compromise on the time you spend on answer writing, finishing the paper within time, which are important things to focus on right now. The only flip side is that right now you write bad quality answers, which is fine, which is something you will improve over time on. But do not invest a lot of time doing this value addition exercise, right? So far so good, everybody. Any
Yes.
questions that you have? Any questions? No questions? Somebody? Anyone? Am I even audible?
Yes,
You
ma'am.
can... Okay, great. So do you want to take a couple of minutes of break before we move into the presentation aspect? Okay, there's a question. Reading economic times is beneficial for us. So unless you're an economics optional candidate, I would recommend not to focus a lot of time reading these economic dailies, because it'll be an additional burden for you. What I would suggest is stick to one source, preferably the Hindu, which is what most of us read. But listen to these economics current affairs survey summary videos. A lot of these institutes give them for free on YouTube. Listen to, I think they have one video per week, so you can listen to them. I think that's more than enough. There they summarize all these important economic times articles for us. But on a daily basis, I would say don't do it. I don't think it's very productive use of your time. Any other questions? So let's take a couple of minutes of break. Let's probably meet at 7:37. What would you say? Sorry, 5:37. Is that a good enough time to recuperate? YouTube channel name. So I used to follow Baiju's IAS. We have this um, weekly economics summary videos. So I used to listen to them. There are other summary videos also. And like I said before, Kana is also one good platform where already iLearn IAS is doing a lot of work for you. So they are actually summarizing um, a lot of these content, and they're actually segregating it by subtopics in GS3. So if you're not making use of this already, please have a look at that. That's also a good place, because the content that they put there is also from these economic dailies, whatever they have under economics, right? Any other questions, or do you want a break? Okay, couple of minutes of break. We'll meet at 5:37. 2 minutes break, right? And then we'll move on to presentation. So I'll show you some basic frameworks that we can employ when it comes to our brainstorming exercise. And then I'll show you some of my answer copies. And after that, we'll do a couple of practice questions from previous year, right? So a couple of minutes. Let's meet at 5:37. Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
So we'll move on to presentation. Um, so we have assimilated all this content. So now the task is how to put all this together and write a good answer, right? Um, so I think this part of answer writing is something that is common to all GS papers. It's not specifically something that we need to remember with respect to economics. But nonetheless, pay attention to the question directives. I'm sure you've had plenty of classes regarding this in iLearn, right? So always pay attention to the question directives. Stick to the demand of the question. Always try to write in the IBC format. Even in the actual exam, I made sure that all the answers that I had written were in the IBC format. If you're running short of time, maybe you can skip a couple of conclusions, but plan your timeline in such a way that at least you're able to put something into an answer and create this structure, right? So always stick to the IBC format, and it is definitely something that is rewarded by UPSC. Sufficient points for each part of the question. That's also something that is non-negotiable, right? Justice to all parts of the question. So if there are 2 or 3 subparts, make sure that you're spending enough time and real estate in terms of how much space you're allocating to each part of the question, and make sure that all aspects, all parts of the question get equal attention, right? Space management. This is something we mentioned before. Uh, so don't draw a flowchart that probably takes up half a page, right? And I mean, if you're short of time, there are these answer copies that you might have seen of toppers where they draw one giant flowchart and complete an entire page, and they mention their points within that flowchart. So stick to such tactics only if you're running really short of time. And first of all, make sure you're not in such a position. But if you are, then that's a tactic that you should employ only then. Otherwise, make sure that you're writing in points, make sure that you're allocating sufficient space to each part of the question, and one part of the question doesn't take prominence over the other, right? Sufficient space to each aspect of the question. Underlining. This is something that's probably a little understated, but I feel that when you see something underlined, the examiner's attention actually directly goes to that. And here is somewhere where you can make use of your keywords that we had mentioned before, right? And even when you're writing facts in your introductions and conclusions, underline the data points and probably the source where the data point is coming from. So in such a way that the first thing that the examiner will notice is that, and he or she will understand that you've actually made this effort of reading the news, collecting these facts, and reproducing that in your answer, right? So underlining, and in my experience, it's a little hard to actually write the entire paper, come back and then underline whatever you have written, because uh, when we invest our mind space, we usually do it on a question by question basis. So it's like once we finish our one question, you'll understand when you're sitting in the exam hall, it's more like you don't want to think of the question again, just go forward and finish the paper. So that is the mindset in which we sit in the hall, right? So it's better that you do this underlining exercise as and when you finish writing one answer. So don't wait for the entire finishing the entire paper to go back and underline, right? Appropriate subheadings with words drawn from the question. So this is also something that actually my mentors at iLearn taught me. So what happens is I'll show you when I show you my answer copies. So if there are certain terms that are there in the question, one good tactic is to give a subheading which has that word in the subheading, right? So in that way, it creates this illusion that whatever you've written below, you've sort of made this effort to make it relevant to the question, right? There's a possibility that there are questions which you don't know the right content for, but still if you start with such a subheading, it gives the examiner, it puts the examiner in such a mindset that, okay, the beginning is good, let's see what happens now, right? So appropriate subheadings with words drawn from the question is actually a good strategy when it comes to practicing answer writing. And last but not the least, I can't emphasize this enough, time management. So what happens is we usually are focused too much on quality that we try to beautify an answer, draw so many flowcharts, and we'll end up not finishing the paper, right? I was also guilty of that. I think till probably 1 week before the actual mains, I was not finishing my papers on time. I was at least a couple of questions shy, and that's actually a very bad place to be in, because um, when you see the marks of those who have cleared UPSC, you'll understand that every mark counts, right? And if you've written something in an answer, it will fetch you at least 1 mark, versus if you're leaving it blank, somebody else is scoring an edge over you, right? So always plan your answers in such a way that just like we said, do justice to all parts of the question, do justice to the entire question paper, because no one question is more important than the other, right? If there's a question that you know a lot about, you're not getting a lot of extra credit by writing everything you know about it for the answer. At the same time, if you write a sub quality answer there, but move forward and manage to finish the paper, write in the IBC format, you'll definitely be rewarded more. So time management is something that we should actively be focusing on right from this time, right? Don't wait for the last week before mains to finally finish your paper on time, like I did. Finally, in my actual mains, I did manage to finish everything on time, but it was actually a very big struggle for me. I had to write a lot of full length tests and time myself again and again till I reached that place, right? So make sure that write your answers even when you're practicing answers. If somebody says write within 5 minutes, try to write within 5 minutes. It's okay if it's a sub quality answer. You can always improve content. Your content will improve because you're doing this exercise, you're reading newspapers, you're doing value addition. So over time, your content will definitely improve. Don't worry about that. But as far as possible, try to stick to the time limit. So far, so good. So now going forward, so what I have here is these are some approaches that commonly a lot of aspirants use when it comes to generating points for any answer, right? Again, what I have to say here is these are not plug and play sort of approaches. It's not like you see a question and suddenly you think that okay, let's apply approach X here or approach Y here. So where this is useful is if you're stuck in a place where you can't really get into that zone where you can brainstorm and figure out in what angle should I think, right? So if you're stuck in such a place, and you might be, because of course we're not superhuman, all of us don't know answers to all questions, right? So if you're stuck in such a place, these are actually aids for you to probably bring some structure into your thinking. That's all. But again, this is some kind of a warning that I should say, that do not see a question and then get into the zone where you'll say that let's apply this and that here, right? That's not how this should work. A lot of you might be familiar with whatever is written here. These are very common approaches, frameworks that a lot of aspirants use. Firstly, the stakeholder approach. So when you see a question and if you can't understand what aspect of it should I be focusing on, think of who are the stakeholders, who is being impacted here. If it's a scheme, who are the parties involved? If it's a process, think about who are the agents that come into the process, right? For example, if it's an MPA problem, think about commercial banks, think about RBI, etc. All these are stakeholders when it comes to that question. So that is one angle of thinking that helps you in brainstorming. And the second one is probably a very common approach, the question approach: what, why, how. So if it's a phenomenon, try to think about the what aspect, the definition. You can write the definition in the introduction. Then why, what was the rationale behind this phenomenon. If it's a scheme, what was the reason why it was introduced? If it's let's say a problem, an NPA crisis, why did it happen, right? So use all these question words and figure out answers to those. So after that, you can assimilate that content and structure it according to your question directive. And again, pros and cons, challenges we ahead is something that a lot of us write in most answers, right? But again, that's not something that's applicable equally to all answers. This is just a way of thinking, right? If it fits the demand of the question, you can go ahead and do this. The next is the angular approach, which is basically the social, political, economic, cultural ramifications of something. So if you can't really associate whatever is asked with anything that you have specifically prepared for an economy, you can think of these, and this way you can draw some content from even other material that you might have prepared for other GS papers, right? So the SPECT approach is something you can deploy. Then there's a timeline approach. Basically, if it's a phenomenon that's being asked about, like the LPG reforms, what was the scenario like before LPG? What happened afterwards? Right? Or if it's some kind of act that was passed, the farm bills, for example. I don't know what aspect of farm bills are going to be asked in the future exams, but that is a possibility. That what was the policy motivation when it was introduced? What did not work well? That's a potential question this year, right? So before and after the timeline approach is something that you can deploy. Another example is coal mining, for example. So there we have all this help models that changed over time, right? So you can think of how was the phenomenon before, what changed over time. If it comes to focus, let's say another question that can come is, how has the focus of planning changed? We can talk about the 5-year plans. What was a focus in FIP1? How did it change over time? How did it become more people centric? How did it become more grassroots motivated, right? So all these are all this content is something you can come up with when you think from this temporal framework, right? So again, this is not something that you can blindly apply to all questions. Only if the demand of the question asks for this can you deploy this, right? And the last one is actually sort of a last resort. So if you find that none of these things work for you, you're drawing a complete blank, what you can do is you can connect whatever question is being asked to anything and everything that you had prepared for in the other GS papers. For example, you can think of the historical aspect, geographical aspect, social ramifications, women empowerment related issues, all of which come in paper one, right? Then there's legal aspects of something, governance. How has the governance aspect of a specific scheme worked or not worked? For example, the Swachh Bharat mission, right? So IR not so much, but you can talk about how similar practices have worked well abroad or have not, right? So there again, all these are GS2 synergies that you can draw. Then again, GS3, you can think about other GS3 subtopics like technology, environmental ramifications, security aspects. And last but not the least, ethicality is not really something that we can fit into GS3. But if you think it's relevant for the question, that's also an angle you can think in, right? So like I said before, all these are just frameworks that help us in brainstorming. And I would say the relevance of this is also like what it is given. And the GS approach is typically not something that you should follow, because GS3 is GS3 for a reason, right? You should stick to the demand of the subtopic. But nonetheless, if you're drawing a complete blank, so for example, nowadays there are these questions, some specific questions that are asked regarding schemes. I think in 2020 there was a question regarding Jal Shakti Abhiyan, right? And what were the provisions of the scheme? Something like that was a question. So if you haven't really studied the provisions per se, you can't write nothing, right? So you can use this GS approach and go back and think about where you can draw these synergies and produce some content, right? So far so good. Does this make sense, guys?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now what I'll do is I'll show you some of my answers. So, and you can see that I have, my initial answers were not so great. And over time, there has been definite improvement in the way I have been writing answers, which is something that I really wanted to show you, that at this point, do not really worry about quality a lot, but focus on content building and finishing your answers on time, right? Um, so for example, so this is a very simple question. For example, the Indian economy has been over tertiarized. Do you agree? So now, one specific thing that I want to say here is, when there are these "do you agree" or justification related questions, I would say the safest thing to do is give a yes or no answer right at the beginning, rather than keep the examiner waiting as to what you're going to, or how you're going to make up your mind. Right. As you can see here, my introduction is not so great. I've actually defined tertiary sector, and what I've done is I've actually done this here. I've produced figures over here, and I've unnecessarily given sectoral distribution of primary and secondary, which is actually not the demand of the question, right? If I had just written this aspect, that 54% contribution of tertiary goes to GDP, 33% of the employment comes from the tertiary sector, and then if I had given this statement after that, from a GDP contribution standpoint, it is over tertiarized. From an employment standpoint, it is not. So if I had started with this, it would have been a much better introduction than just giving a definition like this and then drawing a flowchart like this, right? um, but this flowchart is still something you can
draw, it's still relevant to the question. I wouldn't say it is unnecessary, but nonetheless, you get what I'm saying, right? I mean, there could have been a much more specific introduction to this question than what I've written here. This is, I think, the first GS3 test that I had written. And after that, the question asked for, do you agree? It was a justification question. So in the justification, I've written 6 or 7 points where I've mentioned, what aspects, in what aspects is it justified that it has been over tertiarized, right? So the rest of the answer is standard. What I wanted to show you was how you can give very specific introductions that you need not always get from the outset, right? Another question that I wanted to show you. So this is the entire GST paper. So there are questions from tech and defense also, which are not relevant for us today. That's why I'm speeding through this. Yes. So again, this is a very huge question, but it has a very specific demand. So the question is, interventions that were apt in a different economic setting may have lost their relevance in a transformed economy. Economic survey makes the case that each department and ministry must systematically examine the areas where government needlessly intervenes and undermines the market. Using example from at least 3 areas of the economy, explain the wisdom behind this statement, right? Um, Again, I would say the rest of the answer that I've written is decent, but you can see what I've written in my introduction, right? I've written classical and Keynesian schools of thought, which is something that I would say is from my optional overhang. My optional was economics, which a GS3 evaluator need not necessarily appreciate, right? So a better introduction here would have been something like, since it is specifically mentioned economic survey in the question, we could have written something like, minimum government, maximum governance, which is something that figures in the past couple of economic surveys. Or we could have written about Thatcherism, which was an entire chapter dedicated in one of the surveys, right? So all those could have been better facts which could have been mentioned as the introduction. Now the rest of the question goes about and asks where was it justified that the government intervened and where was it not, and specifically 3 areas of the economy. So first, what I've given is I've given a generic description of why in general is government intervention justified and why it is not justified, and that is not specifically related to any of these 3 areas that the question demands. After that, I've written India's historical justifications for intervening, and I've written just some basic pointers, just for the sake of, bringing some uniqueness to the presentation. I've drawn a flowchart. After that, I've written these specific 3 areas that the question demands. So the first area that I chose was Essential Commodities Act. The second area was the banking sector, and the third area was the pharma industry. And for each of them, I've written this is exercise that done this differentiation, that why was intervention justified earlier, why is it not justified now. And after that, for each point, I've written a verdict, what should be the government's focus moving forward. Yeah, and in the conclusion, it's a generic conclusion, but um, so what I've written is, with the newly realized potential of a flat world, hands-free technology, focus of government intervention should be on distribution aspects alone and not on regulating primary markets. Um, Again, a better conclusion here would have been writing something like, the government should focus on its strong areas, which is governance and regulation, and not areas which the private sector may be better at, which is business development, marketing, back-end infrastructure, etc. So comparative advantage is the word that is relevant here. And that is also something that we can regularly find in our budgets and economic surveys, right? So bringing in that comparative advantage word and giving that explanation that government should focus on its strong areas and leave the rest to the private sector, that would have been a better conclusion here, right? So now, just a second. I'll show you just a couple of more answers just to show that probably, how I've improved over time, right? So this is one of the last tests that I had written before mains. I'll share my screen again. Can you see?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So the question is, why is fiscal discipline important for a developing economy like India? In this context, what positive role can creation of an independent fiscal council do for the economy? So first, I've defined fiscal discipline, and this is where what I said before applies, that you should write subheadings which have words drawn from the question. So why fiscal discipline is important as a subheading. And here again, what I wanted to show here is we discussed the stakeholder approach before, right? So this is how you can actually apply the stakeholder approach here. And again, like I said before, don't draw half a page of a flowchart, but here it's okay because I've added some content to the flowchart. So I've written that, and then I moved on to the fiscal council aspect. But again, here there's another scope for improvement. The comment that I've gotten is you could have probably defined a little about what the fiscal council is, right? So that's an improvement here. But again, I've mentioned like 4 or 5 points where how fiscal council can help improve, right? Improve fiscal discipline. So that's one answer. The second answer I wanted to show you is regarding MSP. MSP is also, by the way, a very regularly repeated favorite area of UPSC. So do make sure that you have some content prepared for MSP. So the question is, through MSP, though MSP is a safety net for Indian farmers, they create a vicious cycle of dependency. Explain its importance for Indian agriculture. List major drawbacks of the MSP. So it's actually a very huge question. But like I said before, you should make sure that every aspect of the question is answered, addressed. So first, they're asking about importance for agriculture of MSP, right? So I started with how many crops does MSP apply to, and open procurement is happening only for rice and wheat, and then why is it important for agriculture? Second aspect, drawbacks of MSP. This is actually a very standard flowchart. So it talks about the vicious cycle of dependency. I've reproduced that here. And again, I've justified because drawbacks is one major chunk of this question, right? So it demands more than a flowchart. So I've elucidated more on the points here. And as a conclusion, I've written, a way forward, which is, a suggestion like pooling and aspects like happy seeder, encourage lab to land. So this is a sort of specific conclusion that is probably better than giving a generic answer, right? That's how I've addressed this question. So I think we're good with the examples, right? You do get a general idea about how an answer in GS3 is written. And we can take the rest of the time in probably discussing a couple of previous year questions, right? I'll share my screen again. Can you see these two questions?
Yes, ma'am.
So I would say focus on the first question now, and take some time, take some 5 minutes. And even if you don't write down the entire answer, try to structure it, right? Think about what will go into the introduction, what will you write as content, what will you write as conclusion. Let's take 5 minutes, and some of us can take the initiative and discuss their ideas, right? So it's 6:04 now, so I'll give you 5 minutes. Let's catch up at 6:09. Right now, only focus on the first question. We'll discuss a model answer after that. Okay. Shall we discuss? So the question says, explain the meaning of investment in an economy in terms of capital formation. Discuss the factors to be considered while designing a concession agreement between a public entity and a private entity. So actually, this is a very complicatedly worded question, but actually the demand of the question is very simple. So have you been able to figure out what is a concession agreement between a public entity and a public entity and a private entity? Do you have any ideas? PPP, exactly. So it's basically asking you about different investment models, specifically those which come under PPP, right? So instead of just saying PPP, they're confusing us with all these extra words. But actually, if you think about it, the demand of the question is that it's asking you that when a PPP is to be designed, what are the factors that are to be considered, right? Um, so again, first of all, think about which aspect of the syllabus it falls into. It falls into category 10, right? Investment models. And within investment models, it falls under PPPs, right? Now, let's go ahead and look at a model answer. Before that, does anybody want to share some ideas? Any ideas that you have as to what you should write in the introduction? There are no right or wrong answers at this point, so don't feel flustered, thinking that you might be saying something wrong. Any ideas that you have? Even with respect to what frameworks that we had discussed before. Come on, someone. No ideas? Come on, guys. At least tell me, what will you write in your introduction? You've rightly told me that you should focus on. Yeah.
World Bank definition of investment, but unfortunately, I don't remember that.
That's okay. Okay. That's good, because the first part of the question asks, explain the meaning of investment in terms of capital formation. So when you define investment, make sure that capital formation is the key there. And we're not just defining investment, right? So let's look at a model answer. But that's a good introduction, what you mentioned, that since the question directive is explain, the first thing that we should write in our introduction is the definition. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Right. So yeah, so you can go through this document later. This is iLearn's document. So like you mentioned before, investment refers to GCFCF, which is specifically capital formation related. So that's a very specific introduction, which is a definition that they've given as introduction, which makes sense, right? And the next aspect of the question is basically discuss the factors to be considered while designing a PPP, right? What are the factors taken into? So first, again, they've also given a definition of concession agreement. So if you want, you can actually give this as a one-liner. You can mention, bot models, HMM. These are all different kinds of investment models or concession agreements that can exist between the public entity and the private entity. You can write it in one word, one sentence, not more than that, right? After that, you should jump into your body, which is basically the factors to be taken into consideration regarding public assets, output-based modalities. Sometimes there are riders with respect to outcome. Only if a certain outcome is achieved will the payment happen, things like that. Performance-linked payments, monitoring mechanism, who will regulate and make sure that the work is done on time, who will make sure that somebody is breaking down the timeline into small subparts and ensuring that each deadline is completed. So this all comes under monitoring. Then resource and use rationalization. More often than not, there's this big question of who will control what resource, what kind of help, monetary support comes from the government, and at what point of time will the help come in? Will it come right when the project is starting? Will it come only if certain preliminary criteria are satisfied? So all these are good factors to be thought of before we design a contract. So here, I mean, one question you might have is, it seems like a very specific question, and these seem like very specific points, right? So how can you actually generate points for a question like this? What I would have done is think of this contract, like think of a contract. You're a manager sitting somewhere, and you've been given this task of designing a contract between party A and party B. Party A is the government, party B is the private entity. So, as a, general studies aspirant, not as an economist, think about, like, generally when you design a contract, what are the things you think about? Payment related, output related, resource related, employment related, timeline related. At what point of time what will happen, right? When will the payment structure kick in? So all these are aspects that you can think of while you're designing any kind of contract, right? So use that generic framework and come here and fit it into this context. So I chose this question specifically because it looks very specific and very intimidating, but actually the demand of the question is very simple, right? And this came in 2020 mains. This was a question from last year. And the conclusion is, it's the conclusion here is it should stick to international practices. And I would say one tried and tested trick that works is by heart all the SDGs. So there are 10 of them, right? So remember each number and remember what goes with what does that refer to? SDG 1 is this, SDG 2 is this. So if you can't think of any fact, you can actually mention something like, according to SDG X, corporate governance principles have to abide by these best practices. So that is something an aspirational PPP can do, something like that. So this is a trick that a lot of aspirants deploy when they can't come up with any specific facts to write in conclusions, right? And more often than not, it works. But make sure that you spend that effort to remember what each SDG is and what constitutes them. Now we'll just discuss these questions, I guess, because right. So public expenditure management is a challenge to the government of India in the context of budget making post the liberalization period. Clarify it. I chose this because clarify it is not something that's usually a directive that we see in our practice questions, but this came in 2019 mains. But again, this is a very simple question if you think about it. For an introduction, you can, again, since it's about a phenomenon, you can write a definition of the phenomenon, which is fine, right? And then the next part of the question talks about how it's a challenge to the government of India. Clarify it is nothing but elaborate, basically. And regarding the challenges, all you have to do is basically enumerate. This is like enumerate, give very, very specific points regarding what have the challenges been post liberalization. Post liberalization is a keyword. So make sure that whatever points you write, draw from some after effect of the LPG, right? So again, all the points that I've given here as challenges draw from the post liberalization era. And again, the last part of the question is, how can you better the PM, right? And again, there are some effective government measures that have been mentioned. And lastly, in the conclusion, what we've written is there's a Vimajanan committee, which is given some best practices regarding expenditure rationalization. So even quoting this committee without specifically saying this is exactly what the committee said, but giving a generic answer like what has been given here, that will still fetch you good marks, because this carries a lot of weight. It shows that you know what committee is relevant to what aspect of the syllabus, right? So that's a good conclusion you can write here. We have 2 or 3 more questions. This question talks about emphasis on certain crops brought about changes in cropping patterns in the recent past. Elaborate the emphasis on millets production and consumption. So this question I chose because every year there is a question on cropping, some aspect of cropping, either cropping patterns or some practices regarding cropping, like slash and burn agriculture. That is a little related to environment as well. But when you talk about viable alternatives, it also comes under your economic development. Um, and then there's this question of serial centricity, which comes up again and again in a lot of questions, right? So this is, I chose a question because you should specifically be focusing on cropping patterns a lot, because this is a favorite area of UPSC. So coming back to a question, it talks about emphasis on certain crops brought about changes in cropping patterns in recent past. Recent past is also a key here. Note that. Elaborate the emphasis on millets production and consumption. So again, here they've defined cropping patterns, but it's not necessary. I wouldn't say it's necessary. One thing that you can say is, in some way, this question is actually focusing on serial centricity, right? How has emphasis on certain crops brought about changes in cropping patterns? Because a lot of people are growing rice and wheat. We have a lot of area dedicated to rice and wheat. We have stocks overflowing in go downs. As a result, other crops are suffering, right? So you can actually mention that as a fact. You can say that X percentage of our resources come from rice and wheat, and so much GDP comes from here, so much land is dedicated to this. So as a result, there's some less prominence given to the other crops. That is something you can mention in your introduction. Then elaborate the emphasis on millets production consumption. So don't be scared looking at this part of the question. This looks very specific, but actually I think this came in 2018 or so, and in this year there was a specific focus on some scheme which was promoting millets as a nutritional substitute to rice and wheat, right? So that's the reason why this question came this year. So don't worry so much about the second part, but what I wanted to show here is that there are certain favorite areas like cropping patterns, serial centricity, which UPSC keeps on asking. So be prepared on that. And like this millets question, if there has been something in the news that year, make sure that you give some mind space to that also. Of course, since you're regularly reading newspapers, you will come across them, but keep that at the back of your mind, right? Yeah. One last question I wanted to discuss is, how do subsidies affect the cropping pattern? Again, this is from a previous year. I think the previous question was from 2018. This is 2017, if I'm not mistaken. And you can see, again, there's a question on cropping pattern, crop diversity, economy of farmers, very related from the same bucket, from those 10 list, the 10 bucket list that we saw, right? And again, there's repetition every year. So now the question is, how do subsidies affect cropping pattern? What is the significance of crop insurance, MSP, food processing for marginal and small farmers? So I wanted to put this question here because it's the opposite problem here. It's such a huge question that you feel like you have so many subparts to address. And the challenge is, how can you finish your answers on time if you address every single part of this question? So how can you go about doing it? Again, this model answer has a lot of facts. You don't need to write all of them in your answer. So first of all, maybe a good introduction could be, you can write what percentage of subsidies are being given. What is the government budget that is being spent on crop subsidies every year, right? And maybe in a single line mention, since the question directly asks how do they affect the cropping pattern, you can say something like moral hazard. You can mention that moral hazard term in the introduction part itself. That we can say that a lot of subsidies are encouraging farmers to focus more on growing those crops for which subsidies are given and focus less on other crops, right? So that is an aspect we can bring in from the introduction stage. And then the next parts, I would say, focus some amount of real estate on crop insurance. I think this year it was asked because there was some rollout. The Bima Yojana scheme was, some aspect of the scheme was rolled out that year. That's why it was asked. And maybe like spend only 1/3 of the space for each of these subtopics: crop insurance, MSP, and food processing. And again, the focus here is on small and marginal farmers. That's also an aspect we need to address here. So again, for instance, what we see here is every aspect of those three subparts that we have talked about, they have connected it back to small farmers and listed out why the focus on this aspect is necessary for small farmers. For example, food processing and small farmers, they do not have access to required resources to sell their produce. That's the reason why food processing support is necessary for small farmers, right? So like that, focus equal amount of real estate. Do not over invest in any one part of the question. It's possible that you know a lot about MSP, you don't know a lot about crop insurance. Nonetheless, generate some points and make sure that you're not spending a lot of time focusing on one aspect of the question. So these are the model answers that I wanted to share. So any questions, any specific questions that you have? Otherwise, we are done for the day. Regarding sources or how to go about reading any document or anything at all. No questions? So I'll do one thing. I'll leave an email ID here. If you have any specific questions regarding, how to prepare for any or find sources for any subpart of the syllabus, or if you think that you need some additional support from my end, though I'm not a subject area expert, I can help in whatever capacity I can, right? So if you don't have any questions at this point, you can just shoot an email to this ID and I'll try to help you in every capacity I can. Any questions? Or should we call it a day? Let's call it a day then. I don't see any questions in the chat box. Yes or no, someone?
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Okay, so I hope there has been, I know it's been a little, okay, I have a question here. How to prepare an economic survey and budget? Okay. Yes, I think that's something I should have mentioned. So for GST purposes, I would say start from a summary. You can find any good summary of, let's say, I think Vision IAS, Next IAS, all of these have 5 or 10 page summaries of each part of economic survey. Start from that. And personally, I really found iLearn's Nikhil sir session very useful, because as GS3 aspirants, what we should do is try to focus on any specialities of the survey. For example, if they've been sending some theme that that survey focuses on, like last year it was on how to deal with the pandemic, right? Before that there was minimum governance, maximum governance, so such kind of themes, and there are these nuances that each chapter mentions in each of these themes, right? So we should try to extract some content out of these themes. So from that respect, Nikhil sir's session was very helpful, because he was able to connect a lot of dots and connect chapters and give us a summary of what really the survey is talking about. So definitely follow iLearn summary and start with your word summary, physical word summary of your budget and economic survey. And then go and look at the actual document, the full document. Do not read it word by word. What happens if you read it word by word is you will, focus unnecessary attention on very minute aspects like sometimes there might be a model mentioned. I think last year there was some surgeon model that was mentioned. I don't think even from an optional standpoint, such things are relevant, right? So don't focus on very specific aspects that are mentioned here. Don't try to remember every single statistic. But if there's some overarching figure, or if there's a key finding in a chapter, for example, last year there was this chapter on promoting entrepreneurship, and it had given some correlation between entrepreneurship and schools or locations or something. So since it was an entire chapter dedicated to that, you can just remember the key finding of that chapter, right? So such kind of broad level understanding of what each chapter is talking about, what phenomenon is being discussed, and some key statistics, what is the fiscal deficit, what is the revenue deficit, such kind of key statistics, which I think all major coaching institutes do discuss in their video lectures. That should be more than sufficient from a GS3 perspective. Okay, I don't see any more questions, but if you have any, I have mentioned an email ID. You can shoot me an email, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Okay. Okay then. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day, and all the best.